How are we doing? Is everybody there? Can you hear it? I do. Thank you, Mika. We're in. Great. Yeah.
Hello everyone, a huge welcome to our event and UK Fairwork report launch today. Sorry about technical difficulties for those people listening us online. We are very honored with 3 panelists today, and we will have Dr. Adam Badger presenting the report, but we also have the full UK team here. So we will be also able to respond to any questions if you have. In terms of the introductions, I will ask everyone to introduce themselves. First of all, here from Fairwork. First, all right, Uddin. Already misspelled. Silberman and Selinger. If you could perhaps introduce yourselves and then come back to you.
Yeah.
I'm Ferdousara Uddin. We have also Physiology and Beautification Union. And it's good being here.
I'm Ustek-Spilda. I'm a postdoc at Oxford in regards to human rights. I work on
I'm Emma Philippa, and I am Venture Manager at the Revolution Foundation, and I run our Impact Investment Fund, which has early stage tech that will use experience of work for precarious work.
And online, we are joined by Dr. Sarrah Kassem, lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Social Sciences at the University of Tübingen. Sarrah, can you please introduce?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and for making it happen that I'm here online. Did the sound work? Yeah, okay.
In terms of the organization, of today, we will first start with the report, and Adam will introduce us the report's findings and generally the scorecards. I know everyone has been mainly waiting for the scorecards, and then we will have actually I have forgotten. Anjali, my colleague Anjali, will first introduce the Fairwork approach and what we do at Fairwork. Kavita, my colleague Dr. Kavita Dattani will introduce Fairwork and what we do at Fairwork and our methodology, and then my colleague Dr. Adam Badger will introduce the report and the scorecards. And then we will have a short introduction about our upcoming report on gender. And then we will have speakers' presentations. If we could start with you, Kavita.
Sure.
And Kavita, can you speak into that mic?
I will.
Some sound worries online.
And would you have control of the stuff, right?
I don't know.
Oh, Pablo does.
So I'll listen to you right
Okay, so hi everyone. I just wanted to check one more time online if folks can hear me, okay? If you can hear me, maybe give me some signal by saying yes. I think we've heard that it's still a little bit unclear for those who are online. Okay, great. I've got the thumbs up that they can hear me online. So I've been told that Pablo online you've got access to the slides, so I'll just signal to you when I want a slide change. So I'm going to ask you to move over to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So we're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We've request that everyone's opinions and perspectives are respected in the space. The event is of course being live streamed. The questions are going to be answered at the end of the session. And you can use this link here or this QR code which you can scan in order to send in your questions. And the final thing is that our report is now available live at this link, fair.work/UK. So if anybody wants to access that at any point during this session or afterwards, it's a really easy link to remember, fair.work/UK. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Fairwork methodology, what we do at Fairwork. Hello, could I have the next slide, please? So at Fairwork, we are currently operational across 38 countries, which means that we are doing research along with our partners across 38 countries. One of those countries is the UK, and that's the country that we're going to be presenting findings for today. But I just wanted to signal that this is a big global project, and we're doing this research in lots of different spaces. So we have a large scope of workers that we're speaking to across the world, and we're in this very privileged position of having an understanding of what gig work looks like in many different places across the world, which kind of enables us to say a lot, and that's feeding into this UK research that we're going to be presenting the report from today. Pablo, next slide, please. So many of you will know that we use 5 principles of fair work to do our research. Those are fair pay, fair conditions, fair contract, fair management, and fair representation. Each of these principles guides our research. So we're through our research process, always trying to find out about workers' experiences in relation to these principles to understand whether workers are experiencing fairness in these 5 realms. The way that we do this is by a scoring system. Next slide, please, Pablo. So per principle, we offer 2 points. We have the first point and then the second point. So in total, that results in 10 points. The maximum number of points that a platform will be granted by us is 10 in the end. In order to get the second point, you must have the first point. So I'll just repeat the 5 principles that we have: fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representation. Each of those principles have 2 points underneath them, so that results in 10 points. So the scores that we're going to be presenting today will be presented in this way. Platforms will be granted a score out of 10 with regards to how much they adhere to each of these principles. Next slide, please, Pablo. The way that we make our decision on what the points are through our data collection, our methodology. So the way that that works is through 3 different elements, 3 different ways of us collecting data. The first one is desk research. We map the largest and most influential platforms that are operational in a place, in a city, as well as identifying points of contact or ways to access workers. So the first thing is trying to understand through desk research the kind of background of platform work in a particular city. The second thing is worker interviews. So we interview 6 to 10 workers per platform, and that allows us to really understand the process of work, the ways it's carried out, and the ways it's managed, as well as to confirm with workers that policies are really in place on a platform. And the final thing is manager interviews. So we interview platform managers, we speak to platform managers, we have long-standing conversations with platform managers, and we request evidence for each of the Fair Work principles. And this provides insight into the operation and business model of the platform. So these 3 different parts of the research, desk research, worker interviews, and manager interviews, we put it all together and we analyze it, and then we come up with these final scores, which are collectively decided by the Fair Work team based on these 3 forms of evidence. The scores are peer-reviewed by the country team, the Oxford team, and 2 reviewers from other Fairwork country teams. So we put the data together, we analyse it, and the data is peer reviewed, and then we come out with scores, which we're going to be presenting today. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to, I think, Kassem, who's going to take us through the scores.
Great. Thanks, Becky. Yeah, hi, welcome everyone. Yes, it's nice to see some really familiar faces in the room and have some new faces as well. But yeah, just in terms of scores, if you could have a look at the next slide, please. As some of you have already seen, the scores are now live and the one after, if that's all right. And this is what they look like. So this is our table for 2023. It's also available on the website as well. So you can click through to ratings and then UK. Or fair.work/UK, I think is the immediate link. But yeah, I'll give you something just to look at them and I'll talk us through them as we go. So as we can see, there's been some changes on the leaderboard as a whole. And we can see as well that this is perhaps the result of many different things in the platform economy. This is obviously the first year since many of the COVID restrictions have been lifted, and there's things that have been changing across the whole sector. So just to run you through, I think the most straightforward way will be in terms of by principle to start with, and then we'll kind of open some of that to some more cross-cutting links in a second. Fair pay. So of the 12 platforms that we spoke to, only 2 could show us evidence that assures what we consider to be fair pay, which yes is ensuring the for the first point minimum wage after cost and second point living wage after cost. Yes, I can speak to the microphone. I'm sorry, I'm also trying to look at everything all at once. But yeah, so we have 2 out of 12 that have responded positively to pay. Is that better? Can you guys hear me more? In terms of fair conditions, so this is the way the workers experience their work across all of these sectors. Obviously, this varies intensely from sector to sector. So the kind of conditions, for example, that a ride-hail driver experiences might be different to those of a food delivery courier. That might be different to a kind of domestic worker, for example. So we have a various set of indices that we use, and we talk about these with platforms. One of the risks and one of the conditions that we're always looking evidence in support of is about supporting workers through lone working. This is often a contingent and kind of inherent element of many parts of this sector of the economy. And so, yeah, 7 out of 12 in the first instance, for the first point there, could demonstrate evidence that shows us towards fair conditions. With, let me just check my numbers for the second one, with only 1 being enough evidence for the second point. So you can see that there's actually a relatively steep drop off in terms of scoring between the first and second point of that principle. That might be something we return to as we go. In terms of fair contracts, again, there was a relatively strong response to the first threshold of this principle. So again, 7 met that, and that's all in the report. It's item. Sorry, just make sure you can see at the bottom of the screen. Okay, I'm just trying to. Cool. I will staircase in this way. So yeah, 7 out of 12 principles. Platforms provide evidence of clear and accessible contracts or terms of service. And again, we try and take a holistic view of what that might be. We understand that in some cases it's going to be a kind of general terms for workers, and in other cases it might be a contractual relationship, and this does vary. And so we try and be as broadly kind of open to that as possible. In terms of the second threshold for that, which focuses a lot on kind of liability clauses and other terms that might be found in contracts, we found that 3 platforms give us evidence to prove that they met that threshold. In terms of fair management, if we could look at the next slide. Can we have the next slide, please, Pablo? Thank you. So yeah, 3 of 12 platforms were able to demonstrate effective due process for appealing ratings and terminations. This is something that's obviously really important to many workers. As any of you that might have seen the report, if you look before you arrive today, or hopefully afterwards, when you take a look at the report, you'll see that algorithmic capacity is a strong theme we editorialise in there. And this is where many workers do start to feel some, sort of automatic disciplinary decisions, for example, opacity around where they take place. What we saw in terms of the second threshold, which contains many elements relating to discrimination, and again we see a drop off in terms. Although we don't know, 3 out of 3 got both of these, right? I think it was 3 for 4.1 and 3 for 4.2. Apologies, that's my mistake. What we see in many platforms is there are strong anti-discrimination policies in place. But what we're particularly looking for as well is evidence of processes that really make them meaningful. So whilst having an anti-discrimination policy in place is a really good thing and a really good start, what's important is how does that actually take effect? Are workers aware of the kind of things that they have available to them to actualise anti-discrimination policy when the time comes? For example, it also tries to respond to the fact that many workers will be dealing with lots of different stakeholders within this economy, right? So if you're operating a three-sided marketplace, for example, the worker operates with 2 of those other sides, instead of 1 of those sides, right? So it might be the merchant and the customer. Similarly, workers have to deal with the possibility of discrimination in their car, or if it's other people within the broader supply chain that platform operates. So they're trying to take as holistic a view as possible. And then finally, onto fair representation. We have, so 2 platforms at the minute have union agreements in place. We might talk about those a bit later, I'm not entirely sure. Let's see what comes up in the questions. But yeah, so Uber and Deliveroo obviously have the very high profile GMB agreement that's in place. And what we've seen from PedalMe recently, if anyone is keeping an eye on that part of the news, is that the PedalMe have accepted the principle of voluntary recognition agreement, and they're currently negotiating those details. So it's going to be a really exciting thing to keep an eye on in terms of where fair representation is in this space. Yeah, I think it's inherent in the principles, and obviously clear from kind of our own reporting throughout Fairwork is that we see fair representation as a really vital part of not only the sustainability of the platform economy, but also to make sure it's good and kind of fair work for workers, right? It's a classic trope, but the more agency workers have in the management of their labour process, and the more they can interface with management, and hopefully this results in significant and good changes within the firm. So could we just move on to the next slide, if that's okay? Okay, thank you. I also forget I need to move on to the next slide on my own screen. But yes, as we were saying at the start, so there's massive market uncertainty within much of the platform economy. And this is something that is faced by platforms in addition to workers, right? And what we often see, sadly, is some of the outsourcing of or the passing on of the market uncertainty that platforms face onto the workers themselves. So if the platform operates a model whereby workers have no pay security, for example, if they're not working, if they're paid piece rate, if the platform doesn't have any jobs in the system or not enough to supply workers with a continuous supply of work, it's the workers paying that suffers, right? This is a really important point about how risk is transferred within the sector. Obviously, this comes on top of then what we've seen is the tech financing and cost of living crisis that's happened throughout the globe, of course, but acutely has also impacted the UK. And interest rate hikes. So what do we see here really? I'm going to skip onto this bullet point here, is there's almost 2 factors at play here, right? Is people have customers, the customers that often will be spending money on these services might have less money in their pocket, right? So there's some of that less expendable income which decreases demand on jobs, right? People are also losing their jobs because of the nature of the economy or because of the nature of inflation and looking to take on extra work will allow them to top up their income. Now, this is where the platform economy might provide a really interesting avenue for people to do that, which is fantastic. But on balance, then, what we end up with is an increase in the available labour pool and a decrease in the demand for labour. Right? And if there's no protections for those workers in place, then who bears the brunt of that risk? You know, it's workers that can't feed themselves at the end of the day. It's workers that we've spoken to who have been made homeless, even though they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, which by any standards is unacceptable, right? And that we haven't seen that in only one platform, we've seen it in many. Obviously, this then intersects with the broader kind of axes of the British state. Whilst the hostile environment is, on paper, over, of course, in reality for many migrants living in the system is that, of course, it's not, right? We see the substitution clauses in place in many platforms that allow less good actors to exploit those without documents, which is also a massive layer that adds on to this. And again, increases the vulnerability of the already most vulnerable in society for a form of work that it should hopefully be there to kind of provide people a way out of this, right? That's what people should be able to do through these jobs. We've also seen broader market uncertainty within the sector as a whole, right? So we've seen mergers this year, we've seen acquisitions this year, and sadly we've seen companies that are just no longer financially viable and have decided to shut up shop. So this sets the scene for a very interesting year next year, and I think that's something we might be able to reflect on in terms of what does this all mean? You know, as these big firms start to move towards what might be monopoly status, what does that mean for workers' conditions? What does that mean for bargaining conditions? And what does it mean for the interplay between these firms and customers and workers? But yeah, if we have a look at the next slide. Next slide, please, Pablo.
Is he really?
He's on a slide break.
Yeah. Which he should be entitled to, right? Thank you very much. But yeah, so algorithmic capacity is the theme that we developed out and editorialised in this report this year. What we found when speaking to workers is that it's a key driver of instability, it's a key driver of uncertainty, vulnerability, and stress. A lot of us are in a very lucky position to be able to go to work today knowing roughly what you're going to earn. You know roughly what you're going to be doing, you know what tasks are going to come down the track. In reality, for a lot of these workers, that's just simply not the case. And what we see is that in some platforms that have dynamic pricing models, that the unit price of work is going down, right, over time as they try and demonstrate profitability to shareholders. So now we're in a situation where workers start the day not knowing how many jobs they're going to have, not knowing how much those jobs are going to be paid, and not knowing quite what they're going to have to face as they leave the door in the morning. Sorry, is the sound not working again? Okay. Which is obviously a massive issue, right? And this is amplified by algorithmic capacity. Do workers really know where to wait in the city, for example, to maximise their chance of getting jobs through experience? Yes, this work, by my opinion, is very high skilled. All of the workers that work in the platform economy develop innate knowledges of the algorithms that manage the labour distribution that their fate depends on. But these can change without any interaction with workers themselves, right, or any kind of say. I think this is a really kind of critical point of what it means to the future of the platform economy as we move forward. But yeah, so as we said, workers struggle to know what they know. The wages can be ratcheted down over time. And just to say that when this happens, obviously we have an inflationary crisis, people's costs aren't going down just because their wages are, right? So what happens? People stay out, work longer, they work fatigue, accidents happen, the increase in risk comes. Or people work harder, they work more intensely. Again, what happens? You cut corners, right? I used to be a bike courier myself. And when work is slow, what do? You go through the red lights. You have to, because otherwise you can't pay your rent. And what happens when you go through too many red lights? You're playing a statistics game, right? You can end up very quickly under the wheels of a lorry or a bus without any support to help you to fix your bike or to get back on the road. This is really important. And it's amplified by the algorithmic capacity that is built into the system. It's not a glitch, it's a feature. But yeah, in terms of fair management, and again, this is kind of fleshed out more fully in the report, so please do take a look. Workers are constantly reporting in some platforms that management decisions are made or informed by algorithmic flagging systems. That might be to do with performance, and where they have no say, right? So we've had cases of workers say, I've been fired based on like 3 flags that came up in my system, 3 strike rules. And it took me 2 months to investigate it. And when we got to the bottom of it, all of them were accidents, they were mistakes. So what happens there, right? The workers are unable to pay their bills. When they're re-enrolled on the platform, they're not given any money to say sorry, we made a mistake, guys. What happens is they just have to come back and go back to work and start at the same time. There's also issues we've seen with customers kind of reporting issues with work that's been completed in an effort to have the service provided for free. Which then is reflected directly back onto the worker who is disciplined, often without transparency over how to access details of those orders, right? So because things like ratings and metrics and KPIs are often aggregated, it's difficult for workers to be able to pick out the one and appeal that one decision because they don't know where that rating came from. So it's really important there's some transparency in there as well. And yeah, just in terms of their representation, hopefully their representation by workers being able to give voice to their own situation, their own experiences of this capacity can be really key, providing some of the solution in the long term. There's also hopefully going to be policy insurance and enforcement. I know we were saying we might talk a little bit about enforcement soon, to be in place to also ensure that when kind of decisions are made, and often these take place in a courtroom, when those courtroom decisions are made, they are enforced. Can we have a look at the next slide, if that's all right? So here we've got one of the working stories that's published in the report. It's published in full in the report. James isn't really called James, obviously, and John isn't really called John, because we don't want to give away who's who. But just, yeah, I'll let you have a second to read that quote. Just reflect on exactly what it means. Great. So yeah, what James is really talking about there is obviously the massive feeling of that risk, right, that takes place. When accidents happen, people just vanish off the road. You don't see them for ages, and we hear these horror stories of people being put in hospital, put in wheelchairs, changing disabilities as a result of the accidents that have taken place. What we've seen that is fantastic in some companies is the rollout of big insurance schemes for workers, so they can access support. Again, that's detailed more in the report. But often cases, this is not sufficient. It's not enough, and it doesn't give workers enough to actually survive on the time they have left to work. Sorry, can we just move on to the next slide as well? I'm very near the end, I promise. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so just finally, we look at principle 2 in focus in this report. As we said, there's a massive drop off. 7 companies met the first threshold, 1 met the second. So we decided to take a closer look at this. And yeah, what we found again is the risks of lone working are massive, absolutely massive. We've had stories of workers having guns pulled on them in the doorway when they deliver food, and the platform's not doing enough to respond. We've had stories of people being beaten up in their cars. We saw it the other day, right? And there was a massive Twitter storm of the driver who was physically and verbally attacked in the taxi. These stories are all too common. Only some make the press, only some make Twitter, and so we really only see the very top of the mountain that's here, unfortunately. These things are, of course, exacerbated by decreasing pay, as I've already said, and the massive steep inclines of demand that come with a lot of this work, right? So if you're delivering food, yes, a platform might say you're free to deliver food whenever you like, but there's only orders at meal time, right? So that kind of sets the temporal horizon of your day. And that might mean working long into the night. It might be working long on Friday or Saturday evenings when that kind of takeaway income, as people return from the pub, comes in. And how does that risk play out for different people? So we heard a lot of genuine stories that happen through the platform economy. For example, many women that we spoke to reported not feeling safe when working at night. So that massively limits their income potential, right? Or if they reject a job to an area they feel safe in, and they end up being disciplined by the platform because they rejected too many jobs. This is not acceptable. It doesn't play out fairly or efficiently for any of the workforce. It doesn't take into account any of the needs that different axes of the population might need. But yeah, so very quickly, just to kind of end, what do workers want and need? Well, they want high quality training and equipment. And we're seeing some platforms deliver that, which is fantastic, right? And we try and report that where we can. And we're seeing a shout about taking the report where we can. Similarly, income security, not income insecurity, income security, because this provides a safety net from which they can actually do meaningful work and take it at their own place in what this state. They want live support. We've had a lot of issues with workers on jobs having to wait 15, 20 minutes for a support agent to get back, which is unpaid time for them, right? If there's no waiting time involved. So if you have that happen twice in the shift, you're losing a significant amount of your pay, which means you have to rush through the rest of it. And finally, long-term support and ensuring that if any accidents that take place, obviously we hope that accidents do not take place, and we hope that if platforms can institute as many interventions as possible, that they won't. But when they do, workers need the support. There are inherent risks to this work. It's risky working on the roads at night. it's risky working in other times. And when things go wrong, people need help, they need support, because ultimately it's their work that produces the bottom line for these platforms. So I'm going to leave it there. We have one slide left for the pledge. If you could just pass that on to that Kassem. Thank you very much. Yes, we have a Fairwork pledge. I will point everyone towards the organisation to sign up to the Fairwork pledge, which is basically an agreement to support and try and use the highest scoring platforms from our score table. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, I think I might have did I'm really sorry.
Thank you, everyone. Because we have heard that people online are having trouble sometimes hearing us, I will move the mic along if that's okay. And in terms of the speakers, we will first start with Ferdousara, if that's okay. Just for a quick presentation on GW's work on economy.
Thanks.
Chelsea.
Shall I move out of the way?
Yeah, just open. Hi, everyone. So with GMB, we've been campaigning for quite a few years now with Amazon in terms of better pay, fair pay and better working conditions. We've predominantly been looking around the Midlands region, and the biggest, largest company that we've got at the moment is the Coventry Amazon, which is the too. So what we actually found is, previously before, in terms of a distribution centre, we talked about it as about 10 years ago, they were one of the decent paid workers. In the last 10 years, they've not had a pay increase. If any, they are just above minimum wage. From the company that we did in the last year, they've gone about averaging between 25 to 50p above minimum wage. And our campaign is to get £50, which is the average wage to the majority of distributions across the region. Obviously, this is something that Amazon uses to recognise and to have negotiations with us. The one thing that we've actually found on speaking to Amazon workers across all sites is the concern of the working conditions. They work on an algorithm system basis. So the way it works with Amazon is you come into work and your system starts on your first scan. In between scan, you've got between 5 to 6 minutes. And anything beyond that is considered idle time. So within idle time, it varies. The thing is with Amazon is nothing is ever set in concrete. Every single distribution centre is different. So it varies between idle time between 30 minutes to an hour per day. If you go beyond that idle time, you're actually pulled up and it's adapt. And then it's which on an adapt. 3 adapts can actually mean they can pull you up and actually sack you because you're not performing, and it's all based on performance based. Depending on which station you're at and who is on your team, there is no set targets. It's all based on capability. Anyone who falls below the 20% is pulled up on it, and they call it capability measure because you're not performing. No one within each station will know what their target is because nothing is set. According to Amazon, what they generally say is the target is set on the previous month. Okay. But in terms of the market, it depends on who was on the team. So you could be in the team and you could be below that 20% target. You will never know you're below that 20% target until you're pulled up on it. So there's no reasonable adjustment. So you could get that 20%, you could be pregnant, you could have a disability, you could have mental health issues, you could have some sort of medical condition that prevents you performing to the rest of the 80%. Okay? And they will not put any reasonable adjustments. You are literally just measured and targeted against how that team is performing. You fall below that 20%, you hold upon capability. So the technology is more of a surveillance measure. We call it the Fairwork system. Okay, they measure you, they see your idle time. So I'll give you an example. If you are scanning and your idle time is you're not scanning and it's considered idle time, you've got to find a manager. You've got to find a manager for health and safety issues, or you're not feeling well or anything. It's considered idle time until that manager actually clocks you off as time off task. You could still get pulled up on it.
You get people, because obviously they do not know whether they're below that 20%, there is no benefit of you working exceeding the target, but you don't know you're exceeding the target. And so everyone is doing this whole Hunger Games situation. It's a Hunger Games situation where they're just fighting to survive, if that makes sense. So they'll cut corners, they'll put themselves at risk by, scanning as quickly as possible. There's no safety measures in place. You will find a lot of the workers have skeleton problems, or they'll have ongoing medical conditions because there is no health and safety. There's X amount. Technically speaking, they have all these little safety procedures. They have all these by the books. They follow all the safety standards that they're supposed to. Does it apply to the workers? No. I'll give you an example. I spoke to a picket. So they all get trained on. I can't remember what it's called. It's called pit training, so it's truck training. Okay. As part of the truck training, if it goes above a certain height, you can't use it. Above a certain load, you can't use it. And that's in textbook. Every single person does it because if you don't, you fall below that target. So they all put corners, they all put themselves at risk just because they have to get that performance and hit that target. Another example is they have something called U-boats. So it's like a bit like a trolley, and they have instead of pallets, and they use that. It falls apart. So this is in the Mansfield one, for example. The Mansfield avoids using pallet because they waited until someone actually had a major accident that they stopped using pallets. All the other sites still use pallets, and Mansfield one uses U-boats. Every single person gets electric shocks, not just small minor ones. We talk and see electric people shocks. Management knows about it, but they still persevere. You carry on. It's all falling apart. It's going to get to a stage where someone has an accident from the U-boat, and that will stop. So it's an ongoing process of health and safety, and that's the whole reason of the campaign, to get recognition. So then we can go in and actually look at the health and safety. We can have those talks about pace. We can look at obviously where there's compromises and cuts being made for the workers. And that's literally what we do. The biggest thing that we found as a trade union is what we struggle is, and where Amazon has the advantage. If you look at the demographic of the workers, they are mainly European students and Eritrean background. So they come from a background where they don't they do employment rights, and there's that fear to think they go to management because this is the culture within Amazon. There is no procedure, there's no policies behind it. So we go in and we service our associates. So disciplinaries, we go to reviews. I can guarantee you every single site that we this is different. Every single manager follows and translates the policies differently. There's no set procedure that each one of them follow. The problem with Amazon is managers are so high. Everyone implements it differently. So when we go in, and a lot of this is within Coventry, it's really strong for us to be able to go in, and associates feels a lot more difficult because they have this culture where they come from is you go into it, you have to hit your target, you've got to get paid, and you get pulled up on something, you're going to get that. And they have that feeling that they cannot question because obviously this is what Amazon is not able to do is they go in, have a discipline, this is what we're saying, no. We're actually challenging now. We are to go in, question policies, making sure the correct procedures follow, and we've got associates now that are able to go into these other sites and in the country and represent their colleagues to make sure it's moving forward correctly. There is something else that's going to go on my mind. There is something else I can't remember.
We can come back to it.
No, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. So with the language, sorry, this is it. But with the language issue, we have overcome this because what we found within the country, people, when we started the strikes, for example, we started with less than 100. This is 27. And every single person actually thought they're out there in the picket, management wasn't coming out and reporting them, and they thought they were penalised. Now, every single associate following that is thinking, okay, something is happening, no one's taking us up. We've managed to overcome the language issues and cultural issues to think, we we have to work enough. If not, we're going to get the staff. We do not have any rest. It's absolutely amazing to have associates who are actually breaking the language barriers, creating those voice notes, creating those videos that we can actually use across Amazon as well. And that has been probably a bit difficult challenge, but it's the actual associates who've actually broken that challenge for us as well. The other thing I want to mention is actually working hours. So generally speaking, it is 40 hours. And the worst thing is, it's a high percentage of people that do 60 hours just in their needs. They do 60 hours on the overtime, but on top of that, they do 60 hours to literally put themselves at risk to cut those corners. If you imagine 60 hours a week and you're on one station continuously, but that because you've extended the hours, you've got a higher chance of performing at 20%. The majority of those people that are working for 60 hours end up with some medical condition or injuries. I was actually on the ambulance workers picket, the last one, and we were just having a conversation, and I was speaking to the ambulance workers, and I was talking about Amazon, and they actually said that because all there are customers. They actually did say that. Like, we're there several times a week. The ambulance is called. You don't hear it on the media, you're not going to see it. It's very quiet, it's so hush hush. And a lot of the times, we've heard stories where the ambulance haven't been called, and associates are taking the other associates into hospital because obviously they do not want to be made aware. So there are so many stories when you listen to what these associates have to go through, and it is the whole point of this big system. The whole entire system is today. They're put under pressure, really targets that they're not what the targets are. And it is a huge challenge to this with the whole.
Thank you very much. It's just a general introduction. It's not technical, it's sure.
Great. Sounds good.
Um,
Sound good?
yes, that sounds good. The question is the findings and the management. What can you comment about the algorithm?
Very
5 minutes?
5 minutes.
If you have prepared something, you
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
do you want
Told that I have 10 minutes.
know.
you
Okay.
So fine. It's fine.
So I'll talk for about 2 minutes. If I say boring things, you know, you have those great. I'm going to talk about the themes that I got from the report. Good news, regulation, and under-examined questions. So under good news, I have 3 points. First, there are some decent platforms. Low paying and bad working conditions are not fundamentally inherent to the platform economy. This year's report has 2 platforms that were able to show the workers earn a living wage after costs I wouldn't necessarily have expected. I think it's good news. Second, some platforms have improved. This year, the report notes that even platforms using a self-employment model are adding benefits through private insurance and other protections. I think that's also good news. And third, social dialogue is possible. This year in the report, we see some platforms have made changes, improvements, we can call them, in response to dialogue with their work, and maybe more importantly, unions and collective bargaining are playing a role in the UK platform economy. That was not a given 5 years ago, but that would happen. That's the good news. Of course, the report still documents what we could diplomatically refer to as significant work quality deficits. We've heard fairly graphic descriptions of some of them. That, of course, is not news. Good management is hard. Good algorithmic management is very hard. My second theme is regulation. It is not clear that all of the algorithmic management practices described in the report, or that we've just heard described as commonplace at Amazon, are legal. I'll mention 3 areas of law: data protection, employment, and discrimination. First, data protection. As some of you might might have heard, the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union. However, the General Data Protection Regulation still applies. My understanding is that while it will change, the main concepts will stay. There are data subjects. These are natural persons. Data subjects have rights. The controller, the entity who processes the personal data of those data subjects, is obligated to fulfill those rights. Data subject and controller are defined in a way that persons performing platform work are data subjects, workers are data subjects, and platforms or employers are data controllers. Data subject rights, for example, the right to receive a copy of personal data being processed, the right to have inaccurate data corrected, such as ratings, and the right to receive information about the logic behind automated decisions, for example, disciplinary decisions, all remain on the books in the proposed changes I have seen. I don't know if someone from worker input is here. They're probably the organization working most persistently on this platform economy. But reading this report, hearing your remarks, I'm struck by how impressively illegal some of these practices seem on their face. The report documents many instances of algorithmic opacity. Adam spoke about some of them, but one of the core principles of data protection law is data processing must be transparent. So if these practices are illegal, what more can we be doing to improve compliance? Would it make sense, for example, for Fairwork to collaborate with legal experts on a GDPR audit of the platforms? You could set up a sub-scoring system for data protection compliance. Second, employment law. The report quotes a courier who says, the problem with this platform is they don't tell you how much money you're going to get for a job before you accept it. I'm a programmer, not a lawyer, but I understand that in some jurisdictions, self-employment means you make decisions affecting your profit and loss. If you don't know how much a job pays before you commit to doing it, how can you do that? How can you be truly self-employed if you are punished for declining offered jobs, or if you have no way to set or negotiate your own rates? In the UK, the employment status question seems settled in the platform economy, at least for now, the level of the courts. But the EU is developing new legislation on platform work that sets out what self-employment means. This has happened in some other jurisdictions as well. We could do it here. Last topic under regulation, discrimination. I'll quote from the report again. I also mentioned this. A worker may be presented with an automatic warning if they reject any jobs in the system. But when workers across our sample reflected, they often reject jobs because they don't feel safe working in the areas the job requires them to travel to or through. Then they're disciplined. This seems quite blatant. Is there somebody from lead day? No, it really should be. This seems like an open shut workplace discrimination, even in this measure. So those are three relevant areas of existing law. Two more notes. My understanding is that the so-called platform to business regulation is still on the books in the UK. This is a piece of EU law and protections for, quote, business users of online intermediation services. The protections include due process rights. Self-employed platform workers are probably in this category. If UK platforms fall into this category but don't comply with the due process obligations that are in it, that's probably illegal. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the EU and many other jurisdictions, there's proposed or already enacted legislation on labor platforms specifically. We could do that here too. And I think there's an important role in developing sensible policy for unions, for research, and for socially responsible platforms and funders. My last thing is under-examined questions. The report raises, at least in my view, three topics I think are under-discussed in the policy debates and research around platforms: rating systems, dynamic pricing, and business models. Rating systems are central to platform work and, of course, to a lot of digital commerce. But we know rating systems perpetuate discrimination. We also know, for example, that some ride-hail passengers will give drivers bad ratings if there's traffic and they're late to their meeting, even though it was their fault that they didn't do earlier. Food delivery customers give couriers bad ratings if they don't like the food, or it took the restaurant too long to make it, or as Adam pointed out, if they don't feel like paying for it. The workers have no control over these things, but those ratings affect their ability to get work, and as we've heard, quite difficult to contest. So these rating systems, especially the ones based on star ratings, are fundamentally flawed from a design point of view, but we seem to have accepted them culturally. So where is the research on how to build fair and relevant performance evaluation systems? We need this not only in the platform economy, but also in employment generally. We need best practices. Once we have them, we should score platforms and employers by how well they implement them. And we should develop technical standards and regulation that require platforms and employers to implement them. The report talks about the impact of opaque dynamic pricing on workers. That's important. What about the impact on consumers? I'm not an economist, but in the old economic theory, as far as I understood in the one class I took in college, when demand for a good or service goes up, the price goes up, which incentivizes more suppliers onto the market. The theory was this would happen on its own. In delivery and transportation, the platforms do it. This seems very strange. Why do the platforms need to do it? It should happen on its own. Well, they have to do it because they don't let workers set their own prices. This seems quite odd for an ostensibly self-employment relationship. And it also raises a question about competition. I once heard a funny legal theory, if such a thing exists. If platform drivers are self-employed, then the platforms are price-fixing cartels of small businesses. Yeah, somebody laughed. You laughed. Thanks. A U.S. lawsuit argued this, but the drivers then signed binding arbitration agreements that went into arbitration. So the theory was never tested. But the real question here is, okay, maybe they're not employers, but what are they economically, these platforms? What is the competition regulator's point of view on this? We don't know yet. My last point is about platform business models, and I'd be really interested to hear thoughts from the investors. The report notes, quote, a rise in interest rates sent shockwaves through the VC world, venture capital world, during a financing crisis in the platform economy. Of course, we know that a lot of these platforms are not financially sustainable and haven't been or have been for 1 or 2 quarters in particular markets. There seems to be some value being created by these businesses, but this raises a question. Is the venture capital model the right model for these businesses? Are the time pressures and financial pressures on the managers on VC-funded startups too great to allow them to build safe, responsible, legal, sustainable businesses? We've seen some experimentation around platform cooperatives. We're here at InSpeak House. Some of those people are here. But I think the question is still open. What are the business models and the investment models and the legal concepts that will help create valuable, sustainable, socially responsible platform businesses? I don't think we know yet. Thanks.
This makes a great transition to Emma because my questions were going to be about responsible businesses and if you could tell us why working conditions is important for investors and how is the investment space discussing these kind of or looking at these kind of issues that we raised today. So.
Definitely. I'm going to try and add a sprinkle of optimism to what Six just told us about what still needs to be improved, and there is a lot in the platform economy and in so firstly, the question for the why conditions are important for investors, and there are 2 ways you can do it. The first way is just through a moral imperative that this is the right thing to do to let people have a fair work, fair conditions at work, and you know that's as investors ourselves, the Revolution Foundation, the approach we take, improving the experience of work for people in low-paid and precarious work, which platform work is a really important part of our mission. And we're particularly focused on low-paid work because a lot of our research on labour market shows the intersection between low-paid work and workplace violations or poor working conditions or illegal working conditions is actually that kind of basic Venn diagram is big for those 2 groups. So for us, that's why this is really important work. And also from a wider commercial perspective, better working conditions equal more productive workers with better well-being, meaning they don't need lower recruitment costs, and essentially more profits. So it's really a no-brainer for investors that if workers have fair conditions, then they're going to see a bigger profit. And build sustainable businesses where workers are leaving over and over again and onboarding and recruitment costs really push up. I think also with growth of ESG reporting, so that's environmental, social and governance reporting in the investment world, where companies have to declare how they're kind of being responsible businesses, is also really important for investors, and that helps the case for fair working conditions within that kind of social part of that ESG. Moving on to kind of the in the ethical investment space. I think firstly, I think someone already beat me to saying it, that the gig economy is not inherently bad. It's about how platforms operationalize and interact with their workers. It's a platform, either a platform that gets 10 out of 10 on these ratings or 0 out of 10. So there are some good ones out there, and there is the ability for platforms to be fair for workers. And we have a few of them that we've invested in or are planning to invest in, which is pretty promising, and kind of gives us some hope that Fairwork principles are going to kind of shape the way new companies platforms come into the economy. So the first platform that we've recently invested in is the Equal Care Cooperative. They're a cooperative platform for care workers, and they I think if they were to put themselves against these principles, they do pretty well. Kavita maybe can have a look into it, especially on that fifth one around representation, where I know a lot of labour struggle to meet that principle. They have all their workers involved in every single management decision that's made. They run a complete kind of structure. Everyone gets paid well above the real living wage, and have predictable hours, and are self-employed by choice. They can choose whether they become self-employed or employed. So we're really excited to have invested in them, and they're kind of demonstrating good work in the social care space, but also good work in a labour platform. The second company that I'm going to talk about is Selinger, and they are working in the hospitality industry. When you work for a platform that I'm sure you know is characterised by really low pay, long hours, poor working conditions. Selinger lets hospitality workers rate companies that they work for, so it switches that review process in its head. Make sure that every worker receives at least the local real living wage. Even businesses on the platform don't pay their workers or treat them poorly if that's reported by the people that bring shifts there. So there definitely is progress with the platforms, and we're really able to back them and help with growth.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Sarrah on live stream.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm really sorry. It's a bit confusing trying to listen onto 2 pages at the same time. I couldn't hear whether something was being said, but I'll jump right in. Thank you so much for making this work, and for letting me join in virtually, and hello to everyone in the room. I think this new report is extremely exciting because on the one hand, we see how it's showing that certain trends we're seeing on the platform, in the platform economy around the world, are also reproduced and magnified in the UK, but also there's particular, let's say, characteristics to the national context given the platforms that are there. I think I would like to add to the conversation by saying that it's extremely useful to take a step back and also reflect on the conditions in which this is unfolding. I saw that this was, emphasized in the report and also in the presentation, which is essentially the political economic conditions, the tech conditions, the sociological conditions, because I think they very much carry implications both for the workers and for the platforms, and also for, that way forward, let's say, because it is clear that now 1 year on, the inflation rate now is also different to where it was 1 year ago with the last report. It's been emphasized also by the researchers, of course, that we see a supply of the workers themselves who are powering these platforms, but the demand is decreasing. And I think this is a really important observation, because on the one hand, not only would this say something about the pace at which workers are laboring. So if a specific platform, for instance, doesn't secure that safety for the workers at the workplace, then this is bound to get worse, right? With increased productivity pressures, because you're trying to make ends meet within the context of inflation and the cost of living crisis. At the same time, given how interconnected the different principles are, this is bound to also have an impact on the leverage that workers have and that unionists have and union organizers in trying to push back, because I think this was, this is an essential dimension emphasized in the report, is that some improvements came about also through the labor struggles themselves, pushing for organization, for collective bargaining, for recognition. So on the one hand, while this is a moment in which we're seeing this, I would say, really the platform economy, and the UK is no different here, it's a great example for a labor movement that is also very much grassroots oriented. But at the same time, this is bound to have implications for labor's organization, because, if the demand is going down and the supply is high, then, and at the same time, the safety conditions or the working conditions getting more dangerous, this might affect how workers can, or unions can, leverage the platforms in improving the conditions across the different principles. Now, looking at the rankings of the report, I would also like to throw in maybe one or two questions, perhaps for later, is on the one hand, I was curious as to how the platforms were chosen for this year, because I saw that there were some differences to last year. But a very important observation on my end was that the scoring has changed for some of these platforms. Now, on the one hand, Stewart is emphasized as one that has really seen an improvement, and I think the improvement is huge and hopefully can be a model for other platforms. But by and large, the scores of platforms that were scored also last year has gone down. So I'd be very curious to understand more behind those dynamics, because I think that the 5 principles really show and guide a way to a way forward that is more constructive for the working realities, but also can create a more secure working reality for the people who are powering the platform economy. Now, we see for sure that algorithmic management is just this trend, this thread, this fabric really of the platforms themselves. And I think what makes them so important, or the reason it's so important to emphasize algorithmic management, is essentially because it interconnects across all the principles. So on the one hand, as was emphasized by the different panelists, if we don't really understand how the cost or the pay, the wage, which is already quite precarious, is calculated, then how can we push for that improvement or that increase in times where essentially wages are losing their value because of inflation and rising energy costs, food costs, etc. But at the same time, it's bound to have an effect on something like fair representation, because this is really, as workers have highlighted in the interviews in the report themselves, this is a theme that is mentioned over and over again by workers, this inability to understand what's behind the algorithm, which essentially calculates the wage, but also mediates the employment relationship itself. So I think to wrap up, really, what's important here is, just as this report shows, we can't approach platforms themselves as a black box. The conditions very much vary from pedal me to something like free now, you know, two sides of the spectrum that was scored here. But neither are the workers themselves within this black box, because the working realities, even within a single platform that is scored, can be very different depending on one's own subjectivity, but also on one's own material conditions on the labor market, including, of course, the racialized, the gendered realities that were also highlighted across the report and also emphasized. I think it was a female writer in the report who said, you know, at the end of the day, if you reject a task, your ranking is going to go down, but maybe you don't feel safe going to a specific part of the city as a woman to deliver something. So how does the algorithm account for that? So yeah, to wrap up, I would say that it's very important for us to take a look inside the platforms. And I think that this report shows spaces and opportunities to improve these working conditions and find those spaces for potentials, while of course underlining the agency of the workers here. Thank you. I'm not sure if anyone's...
But we will definitely come back to those questions. Very, very relevant. Angelique, can I? And now we're going to have a little introduction to our upcoming tender report from my colleague, Dr. Angelique Krishna.
Thank you, and just really wanted to thank the panelists. We've been working so hard on this report, and hear all your wonderful insights has been so enlightening for us, and getting all the trends identified. So just before I go into the gender report, I just wanted to take this opportunity to bring us back to the UK report. And one of the things which is connected to gender that they noticed this year was that a lot of the women who started working in platform work now actually used to have jobs in medical fields or as teachers. And they have moved away from that towards ride hailing and delivery. And that's because they really do feel that a lot less emotional labor is required. They feel less burnt out in this platform work. And they also feel that they enjoy not having a boss breathing down the neck. So this is all understandable. Does this mean that platform work is a safety net for these workers who have been treated so badly in traditional fields of education and medicine? As our scores show, not really. No, it's not. Most of them would be lucky to work in a platform that actually gives them a living wage. But more importantly, connected back to the whole algorithmic capacity issue, the safety conditions that they're working in are horrible. As Sarrah had just mentioned in the report, we have an interview with a woman that multiple female workers echoed, which was they don't feel like they can say no to jobs. They're not sure how the algorithms work. They don't know how what the technology can and cannot do. And they also have no idea of what their rights are vis-a-vis the algorithm and the platform. As a result, female workers often feel compelled to take on jobs in they're not comfortable, in neighborhoods that they're not comfortable. And so they really have agency, they don't really have, you can't really say that they're self-employed. These are the type of issues that we are going to be exploring further. We're going to be publishing a report on work and gender, a platform work and gender. We are also going to be releasing more scores specifically on domestic work platforms. So those are two things to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we have been sitting here for a really long time. I would like to just have a 5 minutes refreshment break, just so that everybody has an opportunity to go grab a drink. We have a penny available there outside and some snacks. We'll be back at 5. And in the meantime, if you can think of any questions. This is our QR, and we also have a direct link here, and we'll be able to see all the questions and then address them in the next round. Thank you again very much to our great presenters, our panelists, and we look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Lee had been looking for a job for a while, but was struggling to find work. until a friend suggested Drively, a ride-sharing app. Drively promised Lee could set his own hours.
for people to staying with us online as well. We so the way this question Q&A session will work is that we have this link, the QR code or the link. We have some questions there, but if you're in the audience, feel free to use it too. Especially if you would like to ask an anonymous question, the link is completely anonymous if you would like to use that option.
Okay, one person question, Shay. I asked through the.
If you don't mind being anonymous, we can.
I can do.
Yes, then we will be taking questions from the audience here.
And Funda will repeat it, and so everyone else.
Yes, I will need to repeat your question because the microphone is wired, so we will not be able to circulate around the room. If that's okay, I will start with your questions.
Okay. Okay. I just want to introduce. I'm Silberman. I'm a research fellow at the University of Birmingham, and we recently started a new funded research project on the participation of regular migrants in specific sectors of the labor market, so care work, cleaning, and delivery and logistics in the UK that we work with other countries. And so I do explore the role of platforms in shaping also the living and labor conditions of migrants with no legal status or uncertain legal status. So I have two questions because the issue of migration has emerged in some of the regulations. I have two questions. The first one is if you can provide some insights on how platforms may contribute in exacerbating poor working conditions among migrants with no or uncertain legal status. And then in terms of the processes of syndicalization, you say syndicalization in English? Yeah, okay. If there is a migrant, non-migrant divide, I was interested in what you were saying about the Amazon warehousing country. So if there is a migrant, non-migrant divide, and and how these dynamics of syndicalization in the platform economy are linked to broader trends of re-syndicalization or desyndicalization at the country level. I don't know if you can.
I might not be able to capture it all, but Stefano from University of Birmingham is asking two questions to the panelists, and are you asking them to a specific person?
All of you, because I think the report. I mean, I think all want to answer it.
Okay. All right. And yes, my colleagues who are in the room, please feel free to jump in. Two questions. One of them is about the poor working conditions and how they affect the population. And then the second question is on migrant, non-migrant divide in unionization of workers. Would you like to start, or would you like to start? You could with President.
Great. I'll move the last everyone. So I'll take this question mainly, if that's okay. I'll answer it two things. One is in respect of Fairwork, and one is in respect of my own PhD with this as well. So I'll try and feed in where that's relevant. Firstly, I think one of the most acute examples of this is where we see substitution of subcontracting relationships in the platform economy. So, of course, much of the self-employment status of workers relies on the worker being able to substitute their labour for somebody else to do the work. This is technically what a lot of the legal instruments are kind of pulled to make sure this is seen as self-employment. But when we actually look at that in practice, we've got to examine what's really happening, right? And so what is the expectation placed on the worker who is substituting their labour to somebody else? Well, you're fully responsible to everything you do on the platform. In theory, they become your employee, right? Because you're now substituting them for your labour. So what responsibilities does that mean you have to them? Do platforms set you up with the ability to deal with that? So to look at their kind of set them up with the pension scheme, or to set them up with kind of hourly wages and all kind of employment stuff? No, generally is what we see. Also, the element that perhaps we see more pragmatically happening. And in terms of Fairwork, we try to speak to as many different workers as we can. And obviously, irregular migrants are very, very cautious to speak on any record at any time because of the nature of the situation, because of the horrific hostile environment in which they're forced to live. So a lot of the time, we either have them in interviews or we have kind of contextual information as well that comes through. And what might be happening there is that the account holder who has an account with the platform is informally renting them their account, which means that the platform pays the person with the account whatever the migrant who is the irregular migrant earns, and then the hope is that the person with the account pays the irregular migrant. Of course, what we actually see is that this is just opening a massive window to further exploitation. So if I'm the account holder, for example, then I'm renting my account to Ustek-Spilda, then if I don't pay you, not the police, right? Because what's going to happen then? So you have no recourse, and that is a really, really dangerous situation that you find yourself in. And as far as I can see, is a very direct way in the platform to exacerbate the already existentially awful situation many irregular migrants find themselves in, because they have none of the other levers that they can pull to the authorities, for example. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll sorry.
Just on a union perspective, in terms of work status, it's not something that we generally do check. If you're talking about are they secluded in terms of where they're coming from, there is no station that say that there's secluded to Europeans or these nations. Geographically, do find that it depends on the city. So if you look at Leicester, you've got a higher density of and the Colville one, you've got a higher density of South Asians. And the Colville one, not the Colville, the Coventry one, you've got more the Eritrean and you've got Eastern European. So it's geographically where the people are living. But within Amazon itself, the stations, it doesn't matter because obviously you're looking at the waves that come in. Majority of them are migrant workers with zero to no qualifications for anything. They'll get trained to be picking stackers or whatever stations there are, and that's literally it for them. Within themselves, they do honestly stick to their own community. But that's within that personal choice. It's not something that Amazon encourages or pushes towards or anything like that. It is just the associates themselves that do that, if that answers your question.
And my question was about the participation of migrants or with or uncertain status in the process of into the labor union. So if there is a
we struggled at first because obviously if you're looking at the majority of the workers, they didn't understand what a union was, they don't understand what their legal rights are, their workers' rights. Because if you look at where they come from culturally, geographically, there are no workers' rights. So say for example with the biggest setback we had in Coventry when we were speaking to them, even on the picket line, when we're stopping them to say, you are entitled to this, you don't have to be treated like this. For them, it's like, it's fine, because they do not know anything different. They don't expect anything different, and it's breaking that cultural background and understanding to think, for them, it's bare minimum wages is actually quite good for them. The fact that they're getting paid, they're getting sick pay, that's fantastic for them. And it's trying to break that cultural barrier to say, well, no, actually, it's slave labor. What you're potentially getting is when you're forced to work these certain targets and you're actually injuring yourself or causing harm, cutting corners. It's breaking that understanding to say it is actually unacceptable, it is ethically wrong, it is actually unlawful as well. There's a lot of work that's gone into that for them to be able to understand it's actually illegal. So we do struggle with that, yeah.
I can, but it's good for us. Maybe something?
Sarrah, would you like to comment? It's okay.
I know, just very, very briefly. So I worked for trading for 5 years. We did some interviews with platform-based food delivery workers in Frankfurt. And at the time, there were two main apps in Frankfurt: Deliveroo, which no longer operates in Germany, and Foodora, which is I don't know if it's based in Germany, but we don't have it here. And it was quite striking to notice the demographic disparity when you would okay, we're going to interview 10 Foodora couriers. We're going to interview 10 Deliveroo couriers. 80% of the Foodora couriers were young, white, German-speaking. A lot of them were students, right? And so the whole political economy of wages and working conditions around that app at that time in Frankfurt was, you know, these are German workers, German company, the people in the office speak German, the drivers speak German, and their long-term calculus is, I'm going to do this, you know, for a little bit more money. And then I'm going to go become a chemist or whatever. The Deliveroo riders, 80-90% of them were from Syria, right? And this was 2015, 16, 17. They were fleeing the war zone. And if you wanted to interview them about working conditions, then like maybe they wanted to complain, right? And so there were kind of different reasons why it was difficult to talk to these different groups, but the result was, you know, nobody wanted to talk to you for different reasons. The students were like, oh, I'm not going to be doing this next year. And the migrant workers were like, I'm just happy to maybe get paid eventually.
Thank you very much. Sarrah, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for missing the live cue. The sound was a bit delayed. I think all the points that were mentioned are quite crucial to the working realities of migrants. I think the first question always to pose is what's the labor market like within that local context, within that national context? What access points do, or what jobs are just available for workers who are migrants, and that tends to be the case depending on the context, that it could very much be low wage work, which very much, you know, that's what the gig economy is. It's a manifestation of a normalization of low wage work. So I think the first point is here, the access to jobs. The second thing is, what is the legal status of these people within a specific context? Do they have the legal right to take on a job? For example, in the case of Germany, you know, if you're a student at the same time, and we see this especially in delivery platforms, you know, you might not have the legal right to take on a full-time job outside of your field of study. So platforms could then be a source of income. And then if we take into consideration the cost of living crisis, it really emphasizes here how platforms are like offering or providing a source of income, but very much reproducing and exacerbating inequalities here. And then finally, very great point and question also regarding then how this impacts labor organization, because we see that on the one hand, as has been highlighted now on the panel, is that workers might not know their specific rights within a context. Also, these workers can very much come from a vulnerable context in which, you know, going on a strike isn't just, okay, I'm forgoing a wage for a day, but they can very much face prosecution if they go on a strike. So there could also be this internal fear where you have to, you know, work on you know, normalizing what is possible within a new context and really navigating that, for which, of course, organizers are crucial to let workers know about their rights within this new context. But I would also like to take a moment here to shed light on what's been happening in Germany, where migrant workers, you know, at Gorillas here took initiative in going on strike, and strike is constitutionally protected. However, in this specific case, it was a wildcat strike, which is not constitutionally protected. And just, was it 2 days ago that the court said, you know, they ruled on the side of the platform. So at the same time, you know, each local and national context has a specific, you know, industrial relations that, you know, it's not just about you can unionize or you can go on strike, but under what conditions, under what circumstances. And this can be very overwhelming then for anyone to understand, let alone then taking into consideration what your legal status is, what your dependence is on your employer to stay in the country, for instance, which is something that we very much see with especially Amazon warehouse workers. Thank you.
Are there any more questions from the room?
You want me to come up?
If you want me to repeat your question, you can also come up. Can you please also introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Allison Cole, professor at policy. My question was about gendered work. And I was curious from the gender report authors about what your interview said were the reasons to change work. Because if it is perception that platform work is actually like a safety, even if it's not a real safety net, a perceived safety net, rather than working in health or in education, is the risk of losing a potentially minimum wage paid job in health and education actually balanced out by that feeling of like too much emotional labor? And if that's kind of labor calculation people are making, how can we represent that in the kinds of ratings that Fairwork and others are doing?
Thank you. That's a great question. So Rita and I were in the report. This was an incident that we came across while working on the UK report, UK research, just to make that clear. I think when people are leaving teaching and the medical field, they're not really doing it to get into platform work. They're leaving it because they're just really disgruntled by the conditions they find in these sectors. And then platform work emerges as like an easy way in which to, make a bit of money on the side. So compared to people who work longer in the industry, in the platform work, they tend not to be as likely to multi-app. They tend to be working fewer hours. But it's really like something that'll get some money in, but it's not really considered as a career path. It's more about being so disgruntled by the conditions.
I guess my point with it is pay the only consideration.
So you just asked him saying for the mic that is pay the only consideration. I do think they find it a relief, like not to have to perform so much emotional labor. Like, is that the reason why they took it? I'm not sure. Is this something that they find later on while they're working? Yeah, this is nice that I don't have to keep smiling and all of that. Maybe we can't really tell, but yeah, it's more about what's going wrong in the teaching and medical fields than what's going right in the platform. You want to?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I just want to add something to what Angelique already said, which is that platforms do a great job of representing women in all of their kind of aesthetics, right? So in sectors which are dominated by men, ride-hailing, food delivery, you will always see on the websites of the most dominant platforms pictures of women, narratives of flexibility, narratives which really draw in women to these sectors. So it is beyond pay, right? It's like this promise that platforms are making through these narratives. We can make your lives better through flexibility. This is what it looks like on our images. And I think that is part of what people are telling us when we interview in relation to gender, that kind of draws them into the platform economy as well. So it's the promise of this life that platforms do a really good job of kind of coming across.
Thank you. I don't know if it's usual for characters to comment also. I wrote as a researcher also at Fairwork. I think we should also not ignore the fact that platform labor itself is also not with emotional labor. So emotion, like the transition might be because of emotional labor in a different job, but that doesn't mean that the new job will bring new costs and intensifications of emotional labor. We have one questionnaire. Would you like to know?
Yeah,
Can you please introduce yourself?
I can. Hello, so I'm Jen Knowles. I funded Pedal Me. I stepped down as CEO last August. Really nice to see probably picturing the top of that screen. I noticed that the top two performing companies were both not gig economy companies, and I just have so as PedalMe, we found a way of doing logistics that is somewhere north of 30% more efficient than using vans, right? It's much more efficient using highly trained staff and big bikes. For those who haven't seen, that's a very brief explanation. But we were constantly fighting against tax evading by the gig economy companies to such an extent that even though we were much more efficient, we were always having to push people in a way that, if I'm honest, I was never that comfortable with. And as leadership, we took as much as we could on our own shoulders in terms of like trying to damp demand by using senior staff. But I never felt that it was good enough. My question is, what can we do about the gig economy? And more broadly, what can be done to help change the competitive framework? So it's not just about pushing employers to be better, which I agree is absolutely part of the solution, but it's also like, how do we change the framework so that employers can be better?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. I'm still like choking down my replies as I go a little bit. Yeah, thanks for that. So I think it's something we try to be really clear about in terms of the kind of the principles themselves, trying to put these baselines in. And for example, a lot of the conversations that I have around pay will often be, well, workers are totally self-employed, and so if they don't get enough work, or if they choose to reject work, then that's on them. What is not said in that is that, of course, the platform is in charge of allowing people onto the platform. So if the platform floods its market with labour, then things like pay immediately decrease, right? Opportunities arise less often unless they can create a market elsewhere. So obviously with PedalMe, you have a more standard employment relationship that onboards a set number of workers, right? So it's you guys, or formerly you guys, I suppose, but PedalMe is kind of beholden, I suppose, to making sure there's enough work coming in to satisfy staff costs and staff needs. So the efficiency burden falls on you as the company to make sure that you're utilising the staff that are on. And I think the massive challenge in many of the rest of the platform economy is that is shirked by allowing companies that can just onboard thousands of staff or hundreds of jobs. And so we're not prescriptive at Fairwork about how companies evidence pay. For example, if they can provide any evidence that shows us that all workers earn minimum wage after costs or living wage after costs, then we give them. But the fact is, when you onboard lots of staff, that's very difficult to do, right? People fall down the thin net. And so, essentially, PedalMe as a firm has lots of risk in terms of making sure the work is there for workers to do, right? Because it costs similar either way. I think other platforms evade that risk by not basically paying unless the worker is actively utilised on the job. I think if we start to push against that, then it might address some of that competitive balance, basically, because it would force larger platforms with many staff that are undersupplied with work to really consider their offering option. Does that make sense? The kind of ways to try and address some of those scales. Sorry, I'm just that's not comment on.
Hi, I'm Matt Cole. I'm a lecturer in technology and employment and part of the UK team. It's nice to see a lot of people in person that I've seen over the years over Zoom. I think Ben's question, I want to sort of zoom out a little bit because everything that Adam says is true, but also the problems that you're pointing out extend far beyond the gig economy or even the platform economy, right? So when you have an unregulated labor market, or you have what is really the case here, opportunities for large companies to avoid tax, to actively engage in illegal practices because you don't have a regulatory and enforcement mechanism to make the playing field more level, you're going to have these problems continue no matter what kind of policies that platforms adopt, what kind of work we do, what kind of work that unions do. Historically, unions were the method of enforcing those laws and making and protecting those workers, right? But in this country, I mean, Sarah Connor just had a piece in the FT commenting a few days ago, I think, about how even though we have these regulations, there is no enforcement. I mean, the odds that you get visited by a labor market enforcement official are so low. You have, I mean, previously before this, I studied hospitality work. A lot of the same problems there. Use of self-employment contracts, unpaid labor, wage theft, exploitation, discrimination, and so on. And these companies, they just continue to get away with it, right? So I think we have to work at multiple levels, and for an more ethical company like Penalty to succeed despite everything, that's a hopeful thing, right? But the scale of the other platforms that we're looking at is global, and within UK itself, even the UK government and the existing institutions are failing in their regulatory and enforcement powers, right? So just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Matt. Adam, yes.
Thank you. So yeah, just to follow along on that, I think from an investor perspective, investor pressure is a huge way that the labour platforms, whether you call yourself a new platform or not, can create change. And there's something called the Workforce Disclosure Initiative, which is where companies disclose data about their working conditions or rather than investors to make decisions about whether they're investing in market or not based on the data available to them. So that's kind of a great step in the right direction for investor pressure. And then on the topic of better regulation and enforcement, I agree with what you just said. And actually, when Industry Foundation was earlier this week on enforcement, which was what Sarah was referencing in that FT. And for what you just mentioned, a single kind of enforcement entity that regulates all kinds of, not just kind of the traditional employment model. And then kind of also another way to kind of push this, so like you see, we're opening with unions, which is great to have you on the panel as well today, and really making sure there is the ability for workers to associate and collaborate in a way that's meaningful and not swayed, and really opening that dialogue to begin with.
Thank you. Adam has one point to add.
Yeah, very briefly. I can close my follow. So yeah, what I'm trying to say, Chloe and one of the other top of that is their fates are tied up with the fate of their workers, right? This is key. But some of the big boys on the list and some of the ones lower down, that's not the case. And I think just put it into the context of the broader economy, all of the kind of big cash high burn rate that we've seen in these platforms, they could afford through massive venture capital. The coffers have run dry, the money's running out, and now what's happening? Instead of having to disrupt market spaces, they're having to disrupt policy spaces. And it's where collectively we need to be very vigilant against this to make sure that policy disruption can't take place.
Thank you. Sarah has some questions. Sarah, you have already started us with the questions in the previous panel. I have noted those down. But could you perhaps just again mention same questions, or if you have any other questions you can have?
Yeah, thank you. So I would also want to second the points that Matt has said about, that the regulatory framework is quite crucial here. There is pressure to be put on policymakers who, also have the power to possibly change the laws or push for specific laws that will protect workers. Because as I've highlighted, we see workers, we see unions pressuring platforms and leveraging platforms. And while I'm understanding to the point that, you know, if you want to compete on the market, it's also difficult from that platform perspective. However, there is definitely a responsibility on platforms to create more fair working conditions. And this can also then be backed by that larger context we're talking about, because as was highlighted, subcontracting is nothing new. Piecework is nothing new. We see with the gig economy and the platform economy, these are really contemporary examples of how this is being reproduced, normalized, and previously even celebrated, but at least there has been a shift there in the discourse. In terms of my questions, I'd be happy to repeat them. I was curious as to how the selection was made for the platforms in this report, mostly because, you know, taking a look at the previous reports, many of them, the majority of them were present in the previous reports, but also some kind of dropped out, some were included. So I'm just curious about that. And then I would actually be curious on your analysis and your take as to why we, with the exception of Stuart, actually did see a drop in the scoring across the board, with just very few ones staying at the 1 or 0 points they already had. You know, it's quite shocking, especially for something like Gorillas that had a drop of 4 points altogether. But also Uber and so forth. So I'd just be very curious for like your analysis on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And these resonate with some received online. So add one more question to the list. Adam, why have platforms that you scored before, like Funda, not been included in this report?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying. I'm aware everyone's got my course as well, so I'll try and be as crisp as possible here. Yeah, thanks for that. No, that's a really important set of questions. In terms of where the emissions have been made, in essence, we also do piloting. So what obviously you won't be able to see is really we kind of look at the market as a whole and speak to workers before we even engage in research. And where companies decide to withdraw from the market, for example, we have to try and focus. Obviously, we don't have certain resources, so we try and focus where we can, essentially. And the UK currently, all the Fairwork countries rates like a very high number of platforms. So it's just we're trying to do the best we can with what we've got, I guess, in many ways, and we try and make any kind of decisions with one eye on what's happening in the workplace and in the marketplace at the same time, and that's the kind of best effort of doing that. In terms of the drop in scores, yeah, across the board, there's only been one platform that improved. I would like to, just point out, so that's Stuart that improved by 2 points, which I fantastic to see. It resonates with some of the other points we've seen as well in terms of like funding and tech crises and all this kind of stuff. The regulatory framework is, I think they're the only platform on that list, or sorry, that's incorrect to say. They're one of the platforms on that list that isn't beholden to many investors. So they're owned by Geopost, the same organization as DPD, for example. I understand it's part of the French state, right? Is that, yeah. And so they have one shareholder, essentially, is my understanding. And so the pressures on certain firms are different, right? And especially in profitability crisis, the kind of decisions that companies get to make, because they have certain shareholders there or not, might well be different. I can only speculate on whether the companies may have made different cuts or not. If that makes sense to try and couch some of that, I don't know if that's any sort of
Are there any more questions in the room? Or yes.
I want to just add something.
Sure. Would you like to come here, or I can also repeat? Okay. Would you mind also introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi there, my name's Shah. I'm from the WGB. So one of the things I wanted to also add within this is sort of like the dark side of platform work as well as gig economy work. So one of the things that is prevalent within the gig economy and platform work is sort of like how migrant workers are exploited. So, for example, if you look at delivery substitution system, I think Adam touched on sort of like students who work on the platform as well. A lot of these students come here to work. They don't necessarily have a working visa, but they do have a student visa. So essentially, what they do is they rent out accounts from current delivery or Uber Eats or gig economy workers. A lot of migrants are undocumented, so they came here on this visa and overstayed. Of course, with Amazon, for example, they have migrant workers, but a lot of these migrant workers, it's not so much as they know their rights or they don't know their rights, it's so much as it's more like Amazon treats them as disposable workers, essentially. They come here, they work. If they get kicked out of the company, then they just go back to their original countries. So for them, so they have a steady supply of migrants coming in to basically forcefully work. And I've had personal experience with Amazon themselves. My brother-in-law even worked for Amazon, so I'm well aware of how Amazon treats its workers. But then also I'm well aware of working within the industry for quite a long time. So I've worked as a courier for about 7 years. I've worked pretty much every single company within London. So that's literally probably about 10 or 20 different companies that I started up across that 7 years. And it's like, yes, we have fair work for people and tell them their rights, but then also within the economy, there's also that dark side of it where you do have migrants who do come in who don't get representation and they can't get representation because of their citizenship status. For example, one of the things that the Met is doing is targeting delivery workers. It, there's been several reports around. Now, the issue here is if I had an Uber bag with me and I rode down a road where police are actually targeting delivery riders, I'll get stopped because of the color of my skin or just because I have the bag on me. If I have a normal bag on me, I guarantee I will not be stopped. And I've actually tested and tried this as well, and it's actually worked. Now, the thing is, what needs to be understood is that yes, we can tackle the fair work side of it and make sure people have rights, but then also we need to make sure that platforms are being held responsible, or if they have undocumented workers on their platform working. And again, that's kind of slavery, essentially, even though these companies say we're anti-slavery, you are actually paying slave wages and treating people as slaves. So I just wanted to sort of
We have one more question over there. Which was it you? With that right hand.
I had a thought about the thing that was said earlier, but
Okay.
it's not really.
Sorry, was it put you on the spot? I just thought I saw that hand.
Often it's part comment, part question.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Heather Ward from University College London, and we've done quite a bit of work over the last 3 to 4 years on the gig economy, particularly on parcel delivery on our first report and cycle, motorcycle delivery, and on our most recent report, we've looked at the difference between employed motorcycle POPs delivery food deliverers and the gig economy, and the two business models are really quite frightening in terms of the way that the gig economy people are treated, in terms of them not having any safety equipment, in terms of the platform manager who dishes out the jobs for them, not caring really about what happens to them. We heard lots of stories of people being injured and phoning in, and so they said, well, what's going to happen to the food then? you've got to deliver your food. They weren't the slightest bit interested in the injury to the motorcyclist or the cyclist. And so there is a whole side of things, of the risk and the occupational risk to these people that are put on by chasing more and more work, as we've heard through the day. But there is another partner in all of this that we've not heard a word about, and that is the customer. The customer is the dictator in most of this. And one of the most worrying things from our work is that, well, let's take an example. It's a Friday night, it's absolutely slowing down with rain, it's horrible, horrible night. You say, let's get a takeaway. Let's get somebody to deliver us some food. So you phone up, and it's normally a lad, comes round in absolutely awful conditions that you, as the customer, are not prepared to go out on your own, but you're prepared for this person to call in with your food in these really bad weather conditions where the risk of them being injured really rises exponentially. And I think really that somewhere along the line, we need to take account of the customer and start educating the customer on some of the risks that they're putting these riders under. Because if it wasn't for the customer, these companies wouldn't exist at all, and unfortunately, these people wouldn't have a job. But the other side of the coin is that there are an awful lot of people doing this kind of work who love it. They don't feel exploited. It's their preferred way of making a living. So I don't want us to completely lose sight of that either. And then we touched on the group in the middle, who are students who want extra money, or maybe somebody who wants a bit of extra money. They've got a bit of extra time. They do a little bit of delivery work, either motorbike or bicycle, or parcel delivery in a car. So there are three groups, and then there's this group that we sort of focus more on today, of those that can't get any other kind of work, and they're the ones that are the most exploited. For the others, it's a matter of choice, and they're actually, a lot of them do really enjoy what they're doing, and find it as a job as fulfilling as you can possibly expect under the circumstances. Don't make the same complaint. But there is a tremendous worry about bottom end of those people that we've heard more about today, and I'm particularly concerned about the lack of any consideration by the people who are, in charge of distributing the job. And plus the fact that a lot of these kids, or most of them are actually in their early 20s, have multiple apps. They're constantly, they might work for about they have 3 or 4 different ones, and they're constantly pinging away, and they've got to accept a job, and if you don't accept it within so many seconds, you get chucked off after so many refusals. Again, this is something that we've heard and is in the report. So I think really my question is, where does the customer, the end user, come into all of this, and how can we educate them?
Thank you very much. We will go about 6 more minutes for those of you staying here. Just to briefly comment on this, I know it's unusual for moderators to speak, but as I mentioned, that it's talking a lot, so we'll take a break for a bit. In terms of your question, you're of course right. Customers are an important part of this dynamic. But we do not want to put all the sort of responsibility on the customer. And during our research, for instance, we have seen companies that cancel deliveries in adverse conditions, whether it's too hot or too cold, just to make sure that the drivers are not necessarily exposing themselves to risks. So this can be done. There are companies that show that they can do this. And in terms of increasing awareness, Fairwork Pledge is one dimension that we're trying to do this, to invite organizations to commit to the Fairwork Pledge, saying that the scores are telling us important details about how companies work and what kind of conditions the workers that work on these platforms work in. And finally, just a bit of a promo. In May, June, we're going to have public underground campaign in London with work based on research in the UK. So that will be part of raising awareness about what we do at Fairwork, so to invite customers to be more aware of conditions on the platforms and choose better ones. If
Just have something to add to what was already said. Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity just to respond to that in terms of the customer, but also in terms of our principles, which is just to say that our principles at Fairwork are basic principles, right? Given that the market is left to itself without any regulation, in lieu of any regulation, these are very fundamental, basic principles of what we regard as access to Fairwork. We kind of come up with in conversation with lots of stakeholders, including unions, workers across the world, the ILO, and so on. So I just think it's really important to emphasize here that while we may come across workers in our research in platforms that have a 0 rating, right? They don't have even one basic principle of fair work. And that worker might say to us, I'm completely happy with my job and it's fine for me. It's also important to recognize from a labour perspective that these are still basic principles of fair work that the platform is not achieving. So even though individual workers may have their own experiences and narratives around what that work means to them, a platform may also be, well lacking of what we would regard from a labour perspective of basic principles of what we mean by work. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Kavita. If that's okay, I'm going to switch to the questions we have received online. And if there are other follow-up questions, we can take them, but I do not want to keep you too long. So some of the questions we received online, and because I'm asking questions, I'm not something myself, so I'm going to refer them back to you, are related to our methodology, actually. So I will sum up some of these questions because they touch on similar things. One of them is if you can summarize how the scoring actually works. The second is related to how you choose platforms. And we touched upon this already. There's a question as to why, for instance, there are no Amazon Mechanical Turk and Upwork in this list. And then there's a question about Fairwork has extended its research to many platforms in different countries. Is there any plan to introduce new countries to the list?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. So in terms of, I'll take the easiest one first. So where Amazon Mechanical Turk and Upwork, they are accounted for in a separate report, which is put together by my lovely colleague over there, Jonas, who works on the cloud work report. So if you take a look at our website, there's loads of stuff about cloud work on there, and these are like a to turn up to all the reports and everything. That's excellent. I would really encourage you to go there. Of course, the challenges facing those kind of work, the opportunities are somewhat different. So well worth looking at. In terms of methodology, just to say there's a kind of tripartite methodology at play. So there's desk research happens. We survey what we can see in the news, what's out there, what legal cases are going on, what are the unions saying, what is PR machine of the company saying. We look at all of this. We also carry out interviews with workers, and we do those up and down the country. We don't just focus on London because that would create some set of answers. Obviously, much of this work is particularly urban, so we want to pick up what different urbanities mean for different types of work, how platforms interact with those urbanities, and how the situation is different in different areas. Also, non-urban is also important because often customer density might be lower, so we also want to find out what's happening in rural areas where platforms operate. And then we also speak to the platforms themselves. We try and gather evidence from all sides, basically, and then we come into a judgment, which you can see reflected in the scores. But yeah, I think that hopefully answered it.
Great, thank you so much. Just going around the questions that we received, and we have a question for you. how do you keep platforms accountable to fairness once you have invested in them?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. And something that we're still working on. So I think the first thing that we do is when we make an investment, we build conditions and principles into the legal terms under which we invest. So anything we invest in has to commit to paying people at least the real living wage, which is set the wage foundation and calculated resolution each year. And when we're looking at reporting data after we invested in a company, we check to see that the salary was well above that, make sure that everyone was. I think kind of other reporting methods we kind of particular impact metrics for each company that we invested in to look kind of how many hours we're working, what user feedback. So when the feedback are working on the platform, make sure that it was all positive. Any workers that weren't will they progress. I think would continue to have a really good conversation with the founders and the company we invest in to make sure they're on board with principles about fair work. And the real absolute backstop is that the company we've invested in behaving in a way that aren't aligned with our values around fair work, we can actually allow of the investment and divest ourselves. That's like a very last resort. I don't tend to have into that situation right now in the world. Those are kind of the ways in which we manage that with our companies.
Thank you. So the following question I will ask you. And it's about the dynamic pricing models. Can you development from outside issues like the pandemic, etc. How basically the general question is about what metrics determine dynamic
And what can we do about it? Double blunt stuff. It's not new. Airlines and transportation portals have done this for more than a decade. Amazon has done it for a long time. It's not unique to the platform economy. It was developed in e-commerce. There used to be an entire research area with a conference named the Association for Computing Machinery Transactions on E-commerce. Now it's called economics and computation. So this is a whole area of practice and research. There are economists that work for the big tech companies, small tech companies. This is their job, figuring out sophisticated pricing algorithms that will work based on the data they have available to them, figuring out what more data they can get. And my understanding is that it's largely based on your willingness to pay, right? And so there are a variety of models. You can look in the journalism about this. If you go to Expedia, some sort of travel portal, airline portal, and you get 90% of the way through booking a ticket, and you come back the next day not having booked it, you find that the price has gone up. And part of that may be that it's gone up for everyone. It may be that it's gone up for everyone in your country. It may be that it's gone up for everyone in your city, or it may be that it's gone up for everyone using your device because there's a tracking on your computer, and the website has saved the information that you came, almost booked this flight, didn't pay for it. You're probably more stressed about it today, right? So there are very smart people with large amounts of data and sophisticated analytics software trying to figure out how to squeeze more money out of the consumer. What can we do about it? Well, as we know, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. GDPR, and I think GDPR is vigorously underused. We still have it in this country. Let's use it while we still have it. One of the things that could be an interesting action research project would be using data subject access requests to try to figure out how intermediaries of various kinds use geolocation data, cookie data to determine how much you're going to pay for a service. And I think, platforms, workers talk a lot about surge pricing. People who use platforms a lot know about surge pricing. So it works a little bit differently in these apps than it does, for example, on Expedia, but the fundamental principle is the same. They're smart people trying to figure out how much you're willing to pay, and then they charge you that much. The second part of the answer, what can we do about it, is competition law. And I think that is a longer game to play, because it seems like, the old economic theory, which was price discrimination is bad, everyone should get the personal price, is sort of like old fashioned, and competition regulators seem to be fine with the new universe that we live in. So we would need a competition economist to really answer that question, but we have a
Do you want to move on, or should I go to the next question? The next question is for you, Professor. Can the cooperative model consider a potential solution to work exploitation, and perhaps increase worker collectivization? Can the cooperative model cooperative platforms, cooperatives, considered as a potential solution to worker exploitation and the incentives, and will it increase collectivization? Sure. Question there. What's your opinion on cooperatives?
What's the last bit of the question?
Can the cooperative model consider potential solutions to exploitation? Yeah.
So to you, John.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, that's okay.
There is one question that I will take, and this is related to the data that we work with. The question asks about generating evidence for policymaking, particularly on the worker experience and possible downstream effects of taking part in gig work. Is Fairwork working with any panel studies or census to try to capture gig work participation at scale within the labor market? I expect Fairwork probably has great survey instruments for capturing different dimensions of work experience. So my answer to this question will be brief. We wish we could do this. Unfortunately, gig workers are usually not included in traditional labor market surveys or censuses. They are generally included in the self-employed category if they're declared as self-employed, and this makes it really difficult to identify if they're gig workers or what kind of gig work, what kind of services they provide for gig work services. So this is one of the main challenges that the numbers that we see online are generally estimations rather than precise numbers, and that's also because worker numbers are usually considered proprietary data on platforms, so we don't necessarily have access to them. All right. With this question, I think it was the last one, unless there's a burning question from the audience here. Thank you so very much for joining our panel today. It's been a really lovely pleasure to meet with our panelists and listen to their contributions. Thank you to Adam for the presentation, and thank you to our lovely UK research team here, Kavita, Naomi, Nina, Matt, and did I forget anyone? And we have also other people joined here, Jonas and Nicholas. So thank you to everyone for being part of this research and coming today. We now invite you to have some drinks, some nibbles with us, and I also see my audience for their continued patience as we have significant technical difficulties today. I hope that at least the part they could listen to was audible to them. And of course, we would like to thank our hosts for today's house for allowing this meeting to happen today and helping us for today. Thank you so much.
And what's